Good morning and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH, your home for community radio. 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Sunny day. Welcome to a great week in New Haven. Hope people had a good time at the St. Patrick's Day Parade. It was raw. It was cold. As Markeisha Ricks shows you in some of her photos in the Independent this morning, people found ways to cope, including some people with makeshift tents on Chapel Street while the parade went by. This morning, we usually have Mayor Monday, but Mayor Tony Harp is at the Watley family funeral. Our heart goes out to them. One of the first African-American teachers ever in New Haven, long career. We wish the family the best. Mayor Harp will be back on in 2 weeks. We have some video this morning, hot off the presses in both cases, about criminal justice in New Haven, including an officer saying, and this is significant, is it 11 o'clock yet? I'll tell you why in a minute. Second part of the hour, we're going to have a video and the audio from a press conference this morning on federal research into gun violence. Rosa DeLauro, our U.S. representative, was at the police department with some public health experts and cops. It was an interesting way to start the week. But first, I'd like to show you a body cam video we finally got at the New Haven Independent. It took a while to get it. And it's an interesting morning to be playing this video because something else is happening this morning in state court. There's a man named Navardo Lockhart who has an appearance in court on some new charges, adding to some old charges. He is, the police believe that he is perhaps the most prolific serial rapist we have seen since the East Coast rapist a decade ago. He was preying allegedly on prostitutes. He's denied the charges so far. And picking them up, putting guns to their heads, forcing them to do horrible things, and then taking their phones, hurting them. And the police department did a great job. They've already made 5 cases against them. They believe a lot more in the offing. These are hard cases to make as sex workers are vulnerable. They had to get their trust, beginning with Lieutenant Renee Dominguez, Mary Helen overseeing the Special Crimes Unit, and a whole bunch of officers and detectives who got the trust and made with DNA evidence a great breakthrough when a victim got a new phone and saw in the cloud that the alleged rapist had taken her old phone and put new pictures up. That was a breakthrough in the case. Great case. And you could read about it if you just if you search the name Dominguez on the Independent, you'll find New Haven Independent. You'll find that story. And so that case is being made. It turns out that the police could have caught this guy earlier. They were looking for him. And last May 20th, he was stopped with a woman who told the police at the scene she was being raped at gunpoint. And they let him go. Very controversial incident. And we don't want to overshadow the good work the police did. We also believe that this needs to be reported too. And there was an internal affairs investigation that found that all 3 officers involved, especially Chris Landucci and Jacob Cedeno, had violated police policy. And more than that, it really upset the top cops who have worked hard to gain the trust of the community. So I'm going to play you something you can watch later today. If you go to the Independent, you'll have to wait until the afternoon. You'll be able to watch this video in full. I'm not going to play a lot of it on the air today because we are on radio, and so much of it is beeped out that you're going to hear high-pitched beeps. But I'm going to walk you through some certain parts, and let me just set the scene first. It's late at night by the bridge on Edgewood Avenue at Edgewood Park, and 2 officers stop this man, Lockhart, because he's in a car in a place where they know fishy stuff goes on late at night. The lights are off. They're checking out what's going on. It turns out he doesn't have his registration. He's driving without a valid license, all this kind of stuff. And typical stop. And there's a woman on the right, on the passenger side, who is a sex worker. And she tells the officers, he put a gun to my head and raped me. The officers spent a while, did not separate them to interview them. They actually find what turns out to be a BB gun, looks like a real gun, under the car seat. And they want to get done with this whole thing. They say, is it 11 o'clock yet? And they move on. They even take a knife the woman had and throw it into the water. She had it for self-protection. And they turn their body cameras off at key parts as they talked among themselves. So a lot of that was borne out in the Internal Affairs report, which you can read about in the Independent. But I just want to show you some highlights on it. So Harry, if you don't mind, if we can go to it. I apologize for the high-pitched beeps you're going to hear a lot because they had to protect the faces, especially the victim, but of the accused as well. And it's mostly the cops' conduct that we focus on. But I'm going to do a few minutes just so you can see the scene, and I'll walk you through it. And then I'm gonna skip ahead to a couple of parts, just at a few key points. So here we are, May 20th, late at night, 2018, in Edgewood Park. There's the cops have responded. For a while, they have their body camera video on. And you'll hear the sound. In a minute, you're going to hear the beeps, and I'm sorry for that. And I'm going to skip ahead to some key parts. That's the car they stopped. And a third officer comes, a female, Lindsay Nesto, to talk to the woman. So asking for the ID. That's Chris Landucci, who has had some very questionable other episodes in his young career. Telling him it's his friend's car. There's the police car behind there.
You have any registration paperwork in the car?
That's when they're finding out that his registration looks a little fishy. Telling him it's his girlfriend. Okay, so he's giving him the code for prostitution. So they've decided this is a prostitute. And one piece of training that they were found not to have followed is that they're supposed to treat sex workers with a lot of respect, including when they're victims of crime, rather than just saying just because she's a prostitute.
Just open this door real quick so I can talk to you.
See, they never separate her. I'm trying to put down the loud beeps when they happen. He's writing notes of the name of the woman. That's Jacob Cedeno, who's and they're blocking out her face, obviously, which I'm glad they're doing.
What's your address?
Okay, they just asked her address. She lives nearby. Okay, they're whispering. She's whispering about. She's saying where? He's saying where did it happen? She's whispering that she was under attack at gunpoint.
Come here. Hold on, come here. I'm not...
They're pulling her over. And again, they never separate to talk to her away from the man. And now you can see, if you're watching this on Facebook Live, where the officer's going back to talk to his other officer. Remember, they've said she's just a prostitute, sex worker. So now I'm going to pull you ahead because I know the beeps are a little crazy. As I said, you can watch this a little later. On oh wait, we're at the 2:30 mark. I wanted to watch one part of the 2:30 mark. Where'd you see it? Meaning the gun.
352 to 102 and 20. You 18 or older?
Are you 18 or older?
You're lying. You're getting locked up.
Now that was the key part I wanted you to hear. He said, "Gonna play that one more time. If you're lying, you're gonna get locked up." So she had just told him he had a gun. She's whispering, he had a gun to my head, and forcing me to do sex, or threatened to kill me. And he's saying, if you're lying, you're gonna get locked up. Let's hear that again. Sorry about the beeps.
352 to 102 and 20. You 18 or... Hold on. You're lying. You're getting locked up.
If you're lying, you're getting locked up. And again, what we're listening to here on Dateline New Haven and watching is body cam video. A little hard to see between the scenes. We filled it out in the internal affairs investigation. Now they're going. Now she said, but there was a gun. So they are looking into that. They're not separating her. They're considering her a possible perpetrator, not a victim, which is one thing that's so upset the top cops. Now we're going to go forward to where they're now going to they have them both out of the car and they're walking around to the front of the car. And let's see what they find there. There's the light shining on it. They're looking, she said, look under the seat. So they go look under the seat. Okay, now they're pulling out.
She's saying
She's saying there's a gun in the back seat. So now here's where they're showing the video. There it is. So you see, those BB guns really do look like guns. I got held up by one once, which in the end I didn't know it was a BB gun or a real gun when he put it to my head. And that's what he'd been putting to her head. So now they have, this shows that they found exactly what she said was there. They're still threatening her. If she's lying, she's going to jail. That's how they spoke to someone who, a serial rapist allegedly, has put a gun to her head and threatened to kill her, let's see, for sex. And you can watch the rest of this video a little bit later today. If you check back around 3 o'clock at the New Haven Independent, we'll have it up there. And there are some other key parts there. So what happened was that this got investigated by the police because the police had been looking for this alleged rapist who went on, they believe, to commit many, many rapes of prostitutes at gunpoint. And as they're checking here in the back seat, you'll see they find a knife on the woman. They turn off. She carries for protection. They turn off their body cams. They turn on and throw him into the water. They're questioning what's his real name, but they don't check him out. Or they would have found out the police were looking for him. That's Chris Landucci again. Very skeptical of the woman. They see her as a perpetrator because she's a prostitute. And guy got off for a while. Allegedly committed more crimes according to police. So what happened to these guys? After the investigation.
I'm over at this 33 with 352 right now. They have a female.
That's the officer Nestor calling in. Nestor calling in about the woman. And so in the end, Officer Cedeno, whose body camera it is, resigned rather than get disciplined. He got hurt separately in a car crash while on duty. He's suing the police department for not giving enough aid on that. And he was allowed to resign from that rather than face any consequences for this. Officer Landucci, he got a 90-day suspension. Now, you might wonder why it wasn't more of a suspension. It's because under union rules, if it's over 15 days, he can bring it to the Board of Police Commissioners and he can challenge it. So it's often easier if you can get them to agree to a compromise at the union and the officer agrees not to grieve it, not to challenge it, not to appeal, then it takes effect. So in this case, he got only 90 days. We've had some personal interactions with this Chris Landucci and the rights of people. And he's back. Lindsay Nesto, who came later to the scene, the woman who threw the knife into the water, she was not aware of as many facts that, according to the police, would have led them to believe that she violated even more rules, and she got a 10-day suspension, which the chief can just do. It's under 15 days, doesn't have to go to the police commissioners. So there you have it, folks. The body camera is out. The police have very good reasons, the state's attorney, for not showing the face of the victim. I'm glad they did that because the department does care about the rights of sex workers and other vulnerable members of society. They've gained their trust. That's why this police misconduct of these young officers was so upsetting to the police brass, because they've worked hard to get on good terms with the people on the street and help them solve crimes. And Harry, if you don't mind us queuing up the next video now. So you're listening to Dateline New Haven. It's Monday. It's often Mayor Monday, but today the mayor is at a funeral for the Watley family. Our hearts go out to them. And I'm doing some hot off the presses news, audio, and video here. I'm Paul Bass, your host at 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. So another thing this morning, Monday morning, as usual, if you go to the third floor of the police department, last couple of years they've retrofitted a big room on that floor. And they've moved in the intelligence unit, whose members work on a task force that has had great results. It works with the state's attorney and federal authorities as well to track all these gun cases. They care a lot about gun violence. And they've been able to break some pretty big cases and cut the number of shootings in New Haven to 50 a year last year, which is the lowest in decades since we've started collecting these statistics. We're talking this morning about collecting statistics and how you can use data to try to save lives from gun violence. Right outside the room where that task force meets, there was a press conference in the big general public area of the third floor. Third floor is also where the detective division is and where the suite of chief's offices is at police headquarters. And then you're going to see there, if you see that still, that's Chief Anthony Campbell. He's welcoming U.S. Representative Rosa DeLauro. She's a Democrat who's been there since 1990 when she won her first election, so I guess it's January 91 in Washington. And now that Democrats control the House of Representatives again, she's back running an important subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, which some would argue is the most powerful, consequential committee in Congress because it decides how it spends your money. And she's been fighting to get into the budget money for public health research into gun violence. That might sound like a no-brainer, right? It says that, why are so many people getting shot? What are the causes? Use that information to try to keep people safer. But because of the influence of the National Rifle Association, since the early 90s, there's been no money allotted to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to study gun violence. There's a lot of money given to study rabies, all different forms of cancer. Rosa DeLauro stood up today and said, I'm alive because of that, because I had cancer, because of that research, I'm alive. And even though our shootings are down in New Haven, in Connecticut, we still have, as the most recent year, 250 people were injured from shootings in just the three biggest cities, New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport. 40 people died of gun injuries. I'm not going to overload you with statistics, but they did mention that every day in the United States, 18 children go to the hospital injured from gun shots. 4 of them die every day. And in 2014, deaths from gun violence, gunshots, caught up with car deaths, people dying in auto accidents, and now it's gone beyond it. But we don't. So today, Rosa DeLauro brought some experts with her, people from New Haven Hospital, University of New Haven Public Health, people who worked on the front lines of research to say, basically to support her and say, we back you trying to get this money in and battle the NRA and the Congress people who are beholden to them, who are worried that if you research the health effects of gun violence, which they called an epidemic, that's going to lead to people losing how they define their Second Amendment rights, which is the right to own a gun. We can argue about that another day because I think it's a fair argument. The argument made at this press conference, someone was there from Project Longevity as well, the state, federal, local initiative that works with gang members to try to stop that violence. And they talked about how the real reason for this is similar to the reason we had research and continue to have research into deaths, public health impacts of car crashes. It led to rules like safety belt use, airbags, finding out what are the conditions under which a kid might get hurt. So you had rules about what kind of child seats. Similarly, they said if you had research into gun violence, we'd figure out why so many vets are shooting themselves to death. Why so many kids accidentally get shot, right? We just had Ethan Song in Guilford, 16 years old. What better if we find out more about why guns were left around the house or not kept care of, right? Why people ended up getting shot accidentally, which is a lot of those cases, as well as the psychology of people who kill themselves with guns. What are the kind of warning signals we can find? Harry, before we put on the video, do you want to just weigh in? Because it sounds like you're going out of your mind listening to this liberal stuff.
It's just insane. I mean,
you don't think we should research gun violence?
First off, the VA is doing all of those things with the vets, right? Trying to
suicide,
figure out why.
but not the gun part.
Not the gun part.
Mhm.
So you're saying if they wanted to kill themselves by hanging, it would be different?
It's a crime. Suicide so often, Harry,
It's
happens because
suicide.
of what's easily
Right.
available.
Don't we have all of these programs trying to figure out why people commit suicide? The gun has nothing to do with it. It's the tool that they're using.
But there are tools that are readily accessible when you're in a moment of extreme
Sure,
stress
and
when
you could hang
intervention is going to
yourself,
stop
you
it.
could stab yourself,
not as
and people
simple.
do.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so
it's,
Harry,
it's
let's
not the gun.
let's.
And then you're gonna do all of these,
You're
studies.
you're against research.
No, we can research all you want, but it's not gonna be. What you're trying to do is blame the tool and not the person, right? If we want to actually, we have all of this stuff, these programs trying to figure out why people are depressed, why people are.
Well, what
why
about
people
guns?
are that.
They've got guns left around the
Guns,
house.
Most of these crimes are committed with illegal guns. Okay?
Actually, that's not true. They say the majority of the suicides, as well as the kids in the house. How about all these kids that get shot in houses?
Yeah, but when they throw in the numbers, what they do is they grab all the drive-bys from Chicago. They grab all of that stuff and they tell you this is because of the tool. And most of those tools are gotten from the streets, illegal guns. They have nothing to do with the legal gun
How about all
owner.
the kids? How about all the kids, legal gun owners who get shot in the house?
Let me tell you.
How about in Guilford?
There should be programs where
No, research. They want to find out
research as to why a parent is dumb enough to
No.
leave his gun out.
No. But what were the circumstances? They don't even know, Harry. They don't even have. They're not allowed because the NRA controls Congress so much. They're not allowed to keep tracks of gun deaths. They have to get a few hospitals that are cooperating and then extrapolate those numbers. You guys are scared of facts, man.
No, absolutely not. And I would support something like you purchase a gun, you have to have a gun safe.
They're not even talking about the rules yet. They
and
just say,
like
let's
that, right?
find out what
but
happened.
This is what I'm saying. But actually studying why people do dumb things.
No, how it happened. They want to know how it happened.
Well,
they want to know what happened, Harry. We're not allowed to find out what happened. We're anti-fact right now in Washington.
Not true. We just want more redundant programs.
We don't find out what happened, Harry. They said they can't collect
suicides. We've been studying suicides forever.
No, but we're not allowed gun deaths.
See, here we go. The
gun deaths. We're not
blaming the gun,
but we're
not the person.
We're not allowed
suicide.
to find
out. How
out.
about we start with the person?
But we're not allowed to find out which kids got shot to death. We're not allowed to find that out on a national level. How many there were and what were the most likely circumstances under which they were killed. Why aren't we allowed to know that?
I don't know.
What are you scared of?
I don't know about that.
I know. Instead of us being the advocates, let's hear what the experts had to say.
Keep statistics.
The FBI, the law enforcement was 1,000% behind this today. They said we want some help with getting facts on a national scale. If more people are dying this from any other cause, let's find out.
I'm all for trying to figure out the human mind. I'm all for that.
Not just psychology. They want to know the circumstances. How many kids were killed in the home, and how many cases where there was something in a safe, and how many cases were they out?
That has nothing to do with a study. Just change the reporting system. The FBI has the capability of changing these systems. Now, but when I'm saying when you're studying why a person got killed with a gun, it's just the tool of choice. Mm-hmm. Why the person killed themselves. So
Adam Lanza comes in with a gun into the school.
Adam Lanza, let me tell you,
there are guns and there are
laws
guns,
that got
Harry.
changed, which law would stop that?
First of all, the gun can't repeat so fast. You have the magazines.
No, which law would have stopped it? You can't, because that was a choice that his mother made. That had nothing to do with
what
the
about
law.
the warning signs of his psychology so it can intervene sooner?
Gun owners, you punish legal gun owners.
Harry, if you're crazy now in half the states, or if you committed domestic violence, you're still allowed to have your gun.
No, it depends on which states. Right?
I know the NRA states.
And I'm for if you have a domestic violence conviction.
Right, but see, we're not even allowed to talk about that. Today they're talking about domestic violence. We're not even allowed to study. But we're not even allowed to get the basis for good laws to know when there are
because everybody's
cases.
skeptical of the Democrats who want to take away your guns. That's the point of it all. That's why. Because nobody trusts.
No, it's because the advocates got them whipped up with fear and craziness.
Because
instead
of the Democrats.
The NRA
take
originally was a responsible agency to talk that was for gun safety, Harry. Now they're against gun safety.
I support gun safety, but the Democrats want to take your guns.
Let's see what they had to say, Harry. Okay. That's Harry Drost and Paul Bassner on Dateline New Haven. You can always count on us to see it differently. Let's see how Rosa DeLauro and a bunch of public health experts and gun experts at the police station were talking about it today at 1 Union Avenue here on Dateline New Haven. Yeah.
You want me to do it?
Okay. So yeah, the mouse is acting up. Let me see if I can get it here. Yeah, yeah. If you don't mind, Harry.
Okay, let it go.
And this is Rosa DeLauro at 1 Union Avenue Police Station.
To get data on gun violence and ways in which we can reduce that and make our entire community safer. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Rosa DeLauro.
Thank you so much, Chief. Good to see you. Very good to see you. Why don't I ask Dr. Bechtel, Dr. Maynard, Brett, please come on up, okay? So, and you too, Chief, stay up here.
Sure.
Please, please. Well, I'm very happy. The first thing this morning is to reunite someone who spent 25 years with the New Haven PD, and that's David Hartman, who works with me now, and we are road runners. He really is. He's fabulous. He's terrific, and great training here, and great work on the force. And Chief, thank you very, very much. Thank you for your commitment to keeping our community safe. You know, what you do, which is tireless on behalf of our community. So, and it's something that we cannot fully repay. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for hosting us. What I'm here today to do is to discuss why the epidemic of gun violence is a public health emergency. And in that it is an emergency, it demands public research dollars. So I want to thank our distinguished guests for joining today. Dr. Kirsten Bechtel with the Injury Free Coalition for Kids at Yale New Haven Children's Hospital. Dr. Carl Minges with the University of New Haven School of Health Sciences. Dr. John Hitzman, who could not be here, but Dr. Minges is going to present his data as well. And Dr. Hitzman is with the University of New Haven in the Center for Analytics, so you know where the data is coming from. And Brett Peterkin with Project Longevity. We are here today because, my view, the epidemic of gun violence is a public health emergency. And since 1968, more Americans have died by gun violence than in every American war combined. 2017, guns killed nearly 40,000 Americans. 2017, overdose killed 47,000 Americans. Now, we have dedicated millions of public dollars, research dollars, to addressing and examining one, but not the other. It's time that we support public-funded research for gun violence as well. Connecticut had the 5th lowest rate of gun death in the nation in 2016, according to the Giffords Law Center, and yet more than 170 people still died that year. Of course, we remember Sandy Hook, the shooting in 2012, 26 babies and brave school staff. But there are too many stories of shooting on random weeknights and on weekends here in New Haven, in Hartford, and Bridgeport, across our district and across the state. These gun deaths and the names that we will not hear about are the silent portion of this epidemic. I take gun violence very seriously, and I'm very committed to working on the issue. I now have, really, I feel blessed and the honor to chair the subcommittee of appropriations, which funds the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We held a hearing in the subcommittee last week, and I might add, the first time in 20 years we've been able to have a hearing on gun violence prevention and research. We brought in experts from the research-focused RAND Corporation, the American College of Surgeons, and the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research. The witnesses and my colleagues relayed we must be getting more public dollars into place in order to research gun violence. We try to make strides in Alzheimer's and in cancer. And what we do is we say, yes, let us spend public dollars to take a look at what we can do. Sepsis killed about as many people as gun violence. That is according to a review in the peer-reviewed journal of the American Medical Association of CDC's mortality statistics. Yet, despite similar rates of mortality, sepsis received 150 times the research funding and gun violence. We did this kind of research until the Dickey Amendment was passed in the 1990s. I served with Jacob. I served on the Appropriations Committee. And while it did not ban the Center for Disease Control and Prevention from researching, what it did have was a chilling effect in severely discouraging it. And that's because it was unclear what research was and was not permissible under this amendment. The message was this: if you study gun violence, you risk your career and the agency's funding. Now, I might add, J. Dickey recanted. He recanted, and he came to believe that research can indeed make a difference. And his ex-wife and Dr. Mark Rosenberg, who headed up CDC for a while, we put their comments into the record last week, talking about the value of research. However, we do know the CDC can do this research. HHS Secretary Azar said last year, let me just quote him, "My understanding is that the rider doesn't in any way impede our ability to conduct our research," okay? We are in the science business and the evidence-generating business, and so I will have our agency certainly working in this field, as they do across the broad spectrum of disease control and prevention. The current head of the Center for Disease Control, he concurred. Last year he said, and I quote, "We don't have any restrictions to do the research. We just need a funding mechanism. We are poised to research in this area if Congress chooses to give us additional funding." We are going to give them additional funding in this year's appropriation bill. They have the authority, they need the funding, they are the nation's public health agency, and they must be involved. We could be looking at so many areas, understanding the correlation between domestic violence and gun violence. More than half of intimate partner homicides involve the use of firearms. We need to help those Americans who choose to own guns to do so in a way that helps to keep their families safe. Research has indicated that safe storage is effective in reducing the number of children harmed by guns. We could be examining other common sense measures that can do so. We need to look into the interventions to reduce suicide by firearms. Every year, 23,000 plus die from firearms and suicide. That is less than the homicides. And this is true especially with regard to our veterans. They're twice as likely to die by suicide as the general population, and 2/3 of those veterans who died used a gun. Last week, the President announced an executive order to look into veteran suicide. He established a task force that includes the Veterans Administration, the Defense Department, Health and Human Services, and Homeland Security. The one agency he did mention in any of this was the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So we are going to push to make sure that the CDC is involved as well. This is about burden and the benefits. The burden of gun violence in our communities and its public health implications, and the benefits of the research that we can be gathering in order to mitigate. It's a public health emergency, and it demands research. Let me introduce our speakers, who can provide further details in the cost of gun violence and the benefits of public research. Up first is Kirsten Bechtel, Dr. Bechtel. She's a doctor in pediatric emergency medicine, co-principal investigator with Injury Free Coalition for Kids at Yale New Haven's Children's Hospital, local member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the co-principal investigator of New Haven's Injury Free Coalition for Kids. She's going to talk to us about what she sees as an attending physician in the pediatric emergency department and how studies have helped develop policies in other areas. Thank you.
Good morning. It's really a privilege to be with all of you on this beautiful spring morning. Like I mentioned, Representative Delano mentioned Rosa. Okay, Rosa. I'm speaking as a, health science researcher, an injury prevention researcher, and the opinions and things I'm going to speak about reflect my own beliefs and don't necessarily reflect all the beliefs of everyone at the Yale School of Medicine. We know that firearm injuries in this country are a public health problem. After decades of decline, firearm deaths rose in the United States in 2015 and 2016. This is largely fueled, as Rosa mentioned, by the increasing rates of firearm suicides, accounting for about 60% of all firearm deaths during that period. For the past 25 years, I've been an emergency department doctor for children, and I love my job. But it's really hard to take care of kids who've been shot, because oftentimes they can't do much to help them, even with all the recent advances in trauma care. These children were shot as they watched TV in their living rooms, rode their bikes home from a party, or drove around with their friends on a warm summer night. We know that in the United States, on average, 18 children are hospitalized and 4 children die from firearm injury each day. Children in the United States are more likely to survive a car crash or even things like leukemia than they are from being shot. We know that adolescent boys in this country bear the highest burden of firearm injury and death. We know that there are geographic variations in the way that adolescent boys die from firearms. We know that in cities like New Haven, urban areas, if an adolescent boy dies from a firearm, it's most likely going to be a homicide. If an adolescent boy lives in rural areas, in some of the towns that we have here in Connecticut, from a firearm, it's more likely going to be from a suicide. We know that if a child picks up a firearm in the home and unintentionally shoots somebody else, it will be most often a brother shooting another family member. We know that even if a child survives a firearm injury, they're much more likely to develop behavioral health conditions in the next 6 months, like depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, or substance misuse. So what can we do? There are 2 things I think we can do. First, I think we need to start thinking about firearms as we think about cars. 20 years ago, car crashes killed far more people in this country than did firearms. But in 2014, firearms killed slightly more children in this country than did car crashes. The fact that deaths from car crashes and firearms have converged is alarming because 9 in 10 households in this country have access to a car, but only about a third of households have access to a firearm. So let's think about this. Why are cars killing fewer kids now? Well, cars are safer than they used to be. Having a 5-star safety rating from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration is a big selling point for car manufacturers. This is because of all the refinements in safety technologies like airbags, anti-lock brakes, traction stability control, all features that have been developed in the past decade or so. The other thing we know is that laws that promote safe behavior of drivers, such as DUI laws, seatbelt laws, graduated teen driving laws, have also reduced deaths and serious injuries from car crashes. We also know that child passenger restraint laws have reduced deaths and serious injuries for child passengers when they're in a car crash. So corollary to these laws for cars that promote safe behavior by firearm owners are what we know as child access prevention laws, as Rosa just previously mentioned. We know that these laws, which require that an owner of a firearm responsibly lock it up and unload it so that children and adolescents can't get access to it, are an effective way to reduce these unintentional injuries and deaths and suicide by children and adolescents in the homes where that firearm is located. Later this morning, colleagues from the Department of Pediatrics at Yale, the Yale Child Study Center, the SAFE chapter at the Yale School of Medicine, and Moms Demand Action will testify on behalf of legislation that will improve our child access prevention laws in Connecticut so that they will become some of the most comprehensive laws in this country. But while we know all these things about firearm injuries and deaths in children, in some ways to possibly prevent them, there's still significant gaps in our knowledge. We need to know more about why the shooting happened. We need to know more about how the firearm was accessed. And we need to know more about what are the other effective means to prevent these injuries and deaths from firearms. So the second thing I think we need to do is start thinking about firearms the same way we think about rabies in this country. So let me explain that. Over 40 years, the National Institute of Health made 486 research awards to study cholera, rabies, polio, and diphtheria. And during that time period, 2,000 people died from those diseases. Over that same time span, the NIH made 3 awards for firearms research. And during that period, 4 million people suffered from firearm injuries. So therefore, I think it would be also helpful if the CDC and the NIH treated firearms just like rabies in terms of research funding, so that funding is proportionate to the level of disease or the burden of disease in our communities. So I'm so grateful for Rosa's efforts to enable the CDC to utilize some of the funding it receives to support research of firearm injuries so that we can create a comprehensive scientific basis to develop sound public policy for prevention. And if I might make one other request, Rosa, is that don't let the National Institute of Health off the hook with respect to firearm injury research. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bechtel. No, I said in my remarks last week at the hearing, because we did provide funding to the NIH, National Institutes of Health, and they did that under the Obama administration, right after Sandy Hook, as a matter of fact. And what happened is they began to work on some projects.
You are listening to video from this morning, an audio of a press conference at New Haven Police Headquarters with U.S. Representative Rosa DeLauro and public health experts making the case to start funding research on gun violence and gun homicides and gun deaths and gun injuries at the Centers for Disease Control. The NRA has prevented Congress from approving such money for decades. Rosa DeLauro heads a subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, but she's fighting to put it back in. And you're listening to the press conference on Dateline New Haven, your home for community radio, 103.5 FM live stream at newhavenindependent.org.
Cause of death and the second least funded cause of death after falls. Drowning, nephritis, aspiration, penetrating wounds, heart disease, fires, malnutrition are all more research than gun violence. The information is there. What we don't have is the data and the research to help us to cope with all of this. And now it gives me great pleasure to present Dr. Carl Mendes, who is an associate research scientist for the American College of Cardiology Data Analytics Center, Quality Measurement Group at Yale New Haven Hospital, the Center for Outcomes Research and Evaluation, National Institutes of Health Fellow. His research focused on improving the health of vulnerable patient populations, and he is program director for the Master of Public Health Program. He's going to speak about the issue of gun violence and the public health crisis, and as I said, he has double duty. He's going to pick up some of the effort for Dr. Hitzman, who was going to talk about how the Center for Analytics could use funding if it were available.
So today I'm going to talk from the lens of the professor at the University of New Haven. So as director of the University of New Haven's Master of Public Health program, I instill in our students, who are the future of public health, that public health is about prevention. It is about protection. It's about helping the most vulnerable in our society to lead better lives. Public health is about making communities healthier, developing sensible and sustainable evidence-based interventions and policy solutions to the most pressing issues of our time. Gun violence is one of the most pressing public health problems, and it is 100% preventable. 100%. Try to come up with another example of a health-related problem that is truly 100% preventable. It is a challenge. Despite the modifiable nature of gun violence, it's shocking that so little research exists on this topic. Besides some rough estimates on the number of deaths contributed to gun violence per year, up to an alarming 40,000 deaths and almost 100,000 injuries, and double-digit increases in firearm suicide and homicide rates in most recent years, we don't really know much more. Important public health questions that need to be answered loom, and some of these include: why has gun violence increased over time? Which communities does gun violence differentially affect? What are the socio-demographic and socio-ecological correlates of gun violence? How could predictive analytics be used to prevent gun violence? What are interventions that could reduce suicide rates, especially among the veterans of this nation, who have among the highest? What is the correlation between other types of violence, like domestic violence and gun violence? How can we help those who choose to own guns to do so safely? What works in preventing mass shootings from happening in the first place? What are the long-term effects of gun violence on the urban core? Frankly, we don't know the answers to these questions and other very basic questions, such as how many households in the US actually own guns, what types of firearms and how many guns are owned in households, or how many store them in a secure location. As public health practitioners, we must answer these very central issues to create a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach to addressing this ongoing crisis. Importantly, to identify the answers to these and many, many other questions researchers have pertaining to gun violence, it is not, nor should it be, an exercise in partisan politics. Public health is not partisan. In this field, we're simply looking for ways to solve crises to allow all people to live lives safely and with minimal risk. Just in the way that research funds have been appropriated recently to address the opioid epidemic, or how researchers examine the effectiveness of the Affordable Care Act, or car seat safety, so too should public health have a hand in addressing one of the most preventable causes of morbidity and mortality in the country, gun violence. Since the federal government has not tracked firearm injuries over the past 2 decades, the gun-related estimates of morbidity and mortality result from a small sample of hospitals, translating to very, frankly, imprecise and unreliable data. Thus, there's a dire need for a national public health epidemiologic system to track gun violence, much in the way that the government's fatality analysis reporting system closely tracks deaths from car accidents. This epidemiologic tool should be used in concert with CDC funds being made available to educational institutions and research centers across the US that have unique approaches to understanding this topic that will ultimately provide strong and reliable data from which research can effectively study and provide evidence-based solutions to prevent gun violence. For example, at the University of New Haven, researchers in the School of Health Science could collaborate with those from the Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice, and specifically with the Center for Analytics, to serve as a technical infrastructure for future research into gun violence. The Center for Analytics Information Systems and Analytics Support may be leveraged by subject matter experts within the fields of healthcare, law enforcement, and social policy to better understand how this affects our communities. Appropriating CDC funds to such research would allow us to examine characteristics of gun violence, identifying the protective and risk factors, as well as the mediators and moderators of gun-related violence, and explore the effectiveness of gun safety education and technology to develop interventions. Such a holistic approach to understanding gun violence on many levels would also help to those in community-facing positions, such as physicians, nurses, teachers, firefighters, paramedics, and law enforcement, among others, to address and prevent this devastating problem in our communities. Gun violence is very much a public health epidemic that needs a public health response. Availing opportunities to conduct research is the only way to generate effective evidence-based interventions that can reduce harm and save lives. For that reason, I would like to applaud Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro's efforts to unveil CDC funding and create a space for us to learn more about gun violence prevention efforts. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate that. Now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Brent Peterkin, statewide coordinator of Project Longevity. By the way, I mentioned Project Longevity in a hearing last week with Dr. Stewart of Texas. You know a lot about what you are doing. It is a nationally and internationally recognized initiative here in Connecticut. What it does is strive to reduce violence, specifically gun violence, through direct action, not simply by putting in more law enforcement officers in the line of fire or community members in handcuffs, but through support, coordination, social services, and direct interventions. So far, Project Longevity's work has reduced certain types of gun violence by over 50%. Brent will address the local impact of gun violence, their advocacy efforts, and how such research could potentially assist.
Good morning. Thank you, Congresswoman DeLauro. I'd like to thank the New Haven Police Department for hosting us here today. Chief Campbell and his colleagues, Assistant Chief. I'd like to thank our esteemed scholars for this opportunity. You know, I had some prepared remarks, but I'm going to forego that. I feel it's necessary that I speak from the heart. through our work with Project Longevity, we deal with gun violence on a daily basis. And what this policy is about, what supporting the appropriations for CDC funding is about saving lives. It's about reducing the number of people who have to suffer from the impact of gun injury. It's about helping families who are in desperate need of repair, who've been traumatized after losing a loved one to gun injury. This is also about speaking to the needs of the communities who suffer the repercussions of the impact of gun injury. Last year alone, in Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven, over 250 people suffered gun injury in those cities, and over 40 people died from gun-related homicides. The work that we do through Project Longevity with our colleagues in the law enforcement community focuses on street group and street gang-related gun violence, which drives over 70% of the criminal-related gun violence injury that occurs in the state of Connecticut. My colleagues and I, we visit people who have suffered gun injury in the hospitals. We visit the families. This forces me to recall a family that lost a young one in the city of Bridgeport, Clifton Howell, who was 12 years old, who was murdered in front of his own home. And speaking to his mother and his brother, it's real. It's real in terms of how that family is hurting. The mother has had to take off time from work. The community has suffered, and there is very little research that supports or speaks to how this impacts young people who are exposed to gun violence on a daily basis, people who have suffered gun injury as well. We talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, but what people are facing in the urban community, specifically in the state of Connecticut, but also throughout the country, is present traumatic stress disorder. More research funding is needed. When I was 13 years old, I myself was a target of gun violence. I normalized it. I was numb to my experience. This is a shared experience by many who live in our cities and our communities throughout New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport, but also all over the country. What happens when a young person shows up to school and has been exposed to gun violence? What traumatic informed care or responses backed by research are in place to make sure that that child receives the necessary care to make sure that they have a productive life? What trauma-informed research is there available that addresses the needs of mothers and fathers, uncles, family men and family women who lost a loved one to gun violence and need time off from work? Some have quit their jobs, resigned, because they cannot handle the dual stress of losing someone to gun violence and having to deal with the day-to-day pressures of having to make a living. These are health-related issues. And for those who question the cost of appropriations to support NIH and CDC funding, I say this. This demands bipartisan support. The Giffords Law Center has estimated that a single gun-related homicide can cost an aggregate of over $400,000. A single gun injury, someone who suffered a non-fatal shooting, can cost an aggregate over $71,000. By reducing homicides and gun injury, whether we're talking about domestic violence, urban-based gun violence, suicide, mass shootings, we're effectively saving dollars. Dollars that should be repatriated into funding to support our research community. We also must consider the impact this has on our first responder community. When we think of research through these agencies that should support more evidence-based policies and strategies to support officer wellness, our police officers who show up at the scene of crimes, of shootings, they see firsthand, right? The people who commit these shootings don't stick around. Our officers, our healthcare community show up and they see the tragedies that this has imposed upon families all across our country. So I'll say this in closing. As someone who's experienced this personally, as someone who's visited people who have suffered gun injury in the hospitals, who've met them in their homes, who've met with their families, families that have suffered irreparable damage, we must consider how this impacts Black and brown community and also other communities who have suffered from gun violence, and support this through bipartisan efforts to make sure that CDC and NIH are fully funded.
You've been listening to Dateline New Haven on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio. I want to shout out Rico for tuning in. Shield.